What is it? No. This is such a big deal. I just encourage you to take your concordance and do inductive Bible study on knowledge. Know, the word know, and see how often that occurs, especially in relationship to what God does. And how many times it is said, I am doing this in order that you may know. Okay, now I'm hoping I've got your concept stirred up a little bit here, and so let's pursue this. By the way, is there anyone here who knows anything? Yes. Good. I feel better already.
If you don't, should you leave?
Be my guest. The academic context has a vested interest in making people skeptics. But no one lives as a skeptic, including the people in the academic context. But a part of the human project is to undermine knowledge, especially of things that matter in human life, so that the Word of God cannot have effect in human life. We have the thing in this country called the separation of church and state. Upon what assumption would you say that separation is made? Can you imagine anyone talking about the separation of state and chemistry? Now, there are social and political reasons for not having an establishment of religion. But that's not what we're talking about when we talk about separation of church and state. When people generally speak of separation of church and state, they are assuming that the church doesn't know anything important. It is predicated on the assumption that what the church teaches is not knowledge of reality. You know something if you are able to represent it as it is on an appropriate basis of thought and experience. Knowledge is not just being right. Knowledge has a foundation in evidence and method. When someone says they know something, they have stepped into the public arena because that bears the claim of truth and method. Knowledge requires method, and knowledge requires truth. Now that's what you want in your dentist, don't you? You'd like them to know something. You wouldn't take your car to a shop that said, we're lucky at making repairs. You want them to know something. Often they are lucky, and sometimes unlucky. But that's not what you go there for. You want people who know in this sense. This is what knowledge is. Now you need to understand that, folks, because the confusion about it is what the resistance to the gospel thrives on. I say, well, you know, if it's not knowledge, well, you can just take it or leave it. It's just belief, just faith. Now, a belief, idea, statement, proposition, or whatever is true if what it is about is as it is represented in the belief. You believe you have a dime in your pocket. The belief is true if you have a dime in your pocket. Now, beliefs can be true without constituting knowledge. You pick up beliefs by the people you're with. Little children come to believe most of the things they believe just because the people around them believe. That's a good thing. You wouldn't want them to have to wait until they could know. And we arrive at maturity with a set of beliefs that we've picked up, and then a large part of our responsibility is to sort those out and to find which ones are true and which ones are false. We learn things like, well, it wasn't true just because my folks believed it. Belief never makes truth. Never makes truth. Truth is not relative. Belief is relative. A proposition or belief isn't true because you believe it. It's true because what it's about is as it says. That's true. And you can't make anything true by believing it. You can make something believed by believing it. So when you hear someone say, well, it's true for me and false for you, they've already missed, they don't know what truth is. It's believed by me and disbelieved by you. Okay. Because belief is relative, truth is not. And you can't make anything true by believing it. You just try. Try to do it. Okay, now. Knowledge is the environment of belief. And when you're going to make disciples, I hope you won't go with the attitude that you're going to say some words and God is going to hit them. It won't work. There are occurrences where something like that happens, but you cannot adopt it as your modus operandi. I will say the words and God will hit them. Many people actually believe that. That's where they take on that passage in 1 Corinthians 1 where Paul is talking about the foolishness of preaching. Preaching is only foolish in comparison to what the Jews and the Greeks thought was the way you're supposed to proceed. And in any case, it doesn't say the foolishness of the preacher. Preaching as a technique, declaring, pronouncing, we talked about that briefly, is a way of bringing truth to people, and God does interact with that. What I'm saying to you is don't adopt that as your modus operandi. Bring knowledge of Christ to people. Bring knowledge of Christ to people. That means you have to have it first. And if you have it, it will come to people in a very different way. Because knowledge is a totally different kind of thing from belief. If you bring knowledge to people, you are coming to them as someone who has the right and responsibility to act. That's what knowledge does. Knowledge brings you the right and responsibility to act. Belief does not. If you believe that tooth is rotten, but don't know, and you're a dentist, you do not have the right to start to work on it. If you know that it is, you have the responsibility as well as the right to start to work on it. So knowledge brings the right to act, the right to direct action, to formulate policy and supervise it, and to teach. Only knowledge brings those things. The right to act, the right to direct action, the right to formulate policy and to supervise it, and the right to teach. Now, may I say to you that that's why you're in school. You are not in school to get faith. Do you agree with me about that? You're not in school to get faith. You're in school to get knowledge. Now, if the Christian teaching is not knowledge, what are you getting?
Feelings.
Well, tradition maybe. You're learning how to be good. You fill in the blank. And you go out, you're trained to act like a good. So that happens. Not everything that people think is knowledge is knowledge. You can think you know and you don't. That's a common occurrence. So you have to be careful. But I think probably if you all became convinced that you were not gaining a body of knowledge that authorized you to act, to direct action, to formulate and supervise policy and teach, I think you'd drop out. Now, some of you might say, well, no, but I want my credentials. See, and credentials don't necessarily represent knowledge. You can be credentialed and have a thing sign on your wall that says, I'm Mr. Goodwrench, because I've gone to school, and still not be able to fix cars. Credentialing is one thing, enablement is another. Now, I'm dragging you through this because this is absolutely essential to making disciples. You have to have decided that you are dealing with knowledge. What about belief? You're dealing with belief also. But remember, you believe something when you are prepared to act as if it were so, but it may not be so. Belief can be totally ungrounded, irrational, or false, and no less belief for that. And now you may think that God will really like you if you would act as if you believed something when you don't. A lot of people are acting as if they believe things. That's profession and maybe a little commitment, but they don't believe it. Now let me say something really mean. And that is, when we get up to preach on Sunday morning, we're basically facing a wall of unbelief. And that's why people don't act as if what they say they believe is true. Now, this is not something to harass people with. It's something to try to help people to understand. Many people have trouble with belief because they don't believe, they profess. And professing things does not have the effects of belief. And you need your belief to be environed in knowledge so that your belief is steady and established because it's based on knowledge and continuing experience. Now, I've talked about a lot of different things here that cause us problems in progressing towards holiness and enabling those we teach to make progress in obedience to Christ. But one of the most severe problems is we're not operating on the basis of knowledge. And our beliefs are wavering, and we realize that some person that's been involved in our church, maybe even a minister, for years may show up one day or not show up one day. And then we may say, well, what happened? That's appropriate. And we need to follow and find out. But you can guarantee it was not something that happened that day, but what had been going on all along. They were not solid. They were not operating on the basis of knowledge. So you believe something when you are prepared to act as if it were so. And if that belief is solid and it's true, you're on good ground. You can almost say it doesn't matter whether you know or not. The problem is you can rarely get there with belief unless it's founded in knowledge. See, that's why it's important not just to believe that Jesus rose from the dead, but to know it. That's why it's important not just to believe that God exists and created the world, but to know it. And now that drives you back and look at knowledge and you work on it. You say, well, maybe you don't know it. Could you know it if you wanted to? Are you willing to pay the price to know? The knowledge is like that. It doesn't jump down our throats. If you want knowledge, you have to seek knowledge. You have to do things like pay a lot of money and read a lot of books and sit around and hear a lot of people talk. Right. Knowledge doesn't jump down your throat, and if you don't want it, you don't have to have it. You can reject the knowledge, and if it's getting in the way of your kingdom, you probably will. That's why people fear knowledge today and don't want to hear people say they know, because if they do know, that has a claim that if they say, well, I believe, it doesn't have.
What part does experience play in knowledge?
Confirms knowledge, advances it, right? I mean, we know most of the things we know on authority. For example, you all know the multiplication tables. You do. But you know them on authority. And you do know them. But it's rare to find anyone that has worked out the multiplication tables by experience to find out that even 3 times 8 equals 24.
If you know it but haven't experienced it, how solid is it?
Well, yeah, one of the problems is that people try to give completely general answers to those kinds of questions. And we know that some people know some things better than other people do. And then some people don't know them at all. Typically what happens with the learning process is you have some people who know things and others who don't. Maybe they just believe them. And then as they proceed, the people who didn't know them come to know them. Commitment, choosing and implementing a course of action. You can commit yourself to something you don't even believe in. If you're in the woods and lost, you may not know which way to go. But after a while, you will decide you'd better go somewhere. And you will commit yourself to a direction and try to hold to it. And that's one of the things that human beings can do. We can extend our action beyond our belief, just like we can extend our belief beyond our knowledge. And all of that's extremely important because of the context of finitude that we work in. So we start out with beliefs, we come to knowledge of certain things, then we can test our beliefs by experience in some cases. Some cases it isn't exactly experience, maybe thought, or logically weighing them against other things that we know. So that's what we generally do in school. But profession is saying that you believe something. You may believe it and profess it. That's good. Or you may not even be committed to it and still profess it. So you need these four concepts: knowledge, belief, commitment, profession. And you need to understand where you stand, where I stand, and then you need to help others deal with that. And what you're aiming for in making disciples and in guiding them is that fundamentally everything would be based on knowledge as much as it can. Now, again, you don't have to know in order to believe. There are a lot of things you better believe even if you can't know them. God is at work in all of these areas, not just in one of them. Knowledge has drawbacks. Paul talks about these. The two main drawbacks is you never know anything as well as you could. Right? You never know anything as well as you could. If anyone thinks he knows something, Paul says they don't know anything the way they ought to know. And that is to help you not get carried away with arrogance, because knowledge has a tendency to do that. You tell a little child who's just learned to talk something they did not know, and they are most likely to say, "I know." You test it. Now that's because knowledge is a really big thing in the substance of the self. To not know is to be left out. To know is to be in. Everyone wants to be in. So Paul teaches us we never know things as well as we could. He also tells us that knowledge puffs up. Love builds up. Knowledge puffs up. So should we throw away knowledge? No. We should subordinate knowledge to love. Always. Knowledge subordinate to love. Don't let it puff you up, and it'll help you to remember that you never know anything as well as you might. So we have to keep it in its place, and it is among the things that 1 Corinthians 13 tells us it will pass away because it will pass into sight. And one of the great things about knowledge, of course, is it enables you to do things with realities that you don't see. Truth is designed by God to help us negotiate reality. If you have true beliefs and your wits are about you, you will be able to negotiate reality well, as far as it's dealt with by that belief. Now, knowledge is important. So if we're going to make disciples, we want to make sure that insofar as we can, we're basing it on knowledge, and that we present the way of Christ to people, the preaching of the kingdom of God and all of that. We present it to people as knowledge of reality. Knowledge of reality. Ingrid.
Quick question. When you're talking about profession there, all of a sudden it hit me that all of those things that are practical are also, you can, when we're back to our own kingdom, a lot of times people will profess that they love someone without the commitment, without the belief, without the knowledge.
Right.
You could take that all the way back up that way.
Yep. See, profession is often done to manage our kingdom. And sometimes it's deadly serious, because if you don't profess something, someone may kill you or deprive you of your job and your opportunities. See, that has happened over and over, right? And that's one reason why profession has come to play such a large role in Western religion, but it actually plays a large role in all religion. So people may profess things that they don't believe, nobody knows, and they're not committed to. And that's why I gave you those 4 things. I want you to see how it changes as you go up. Now, there a lot of this I don't want to get into, but you want to think thoughts like this. You can actually not believe some things you know. Because belief involves the will. You believe something, you're ready to act as if it were true. Typical case of a person who, as we used to say, is under conviction. They know something they don't believe. That's why they're convicts. They're captured. They know something that they don't believe. Now, it may be they're just persuaded of something, but they don't want to believe it, and so they reject it. And you can analyze that in terms of William James, because the tension that is set up by that conflict is where a person who is under conviction is living. That's what was happening with St. Augustine, if you know his story. He was sweating under conviction because he had met some people and learned about some people, and he was just practically out of his wits. That's what happened to Paul on the road to Damascus. So we can believe things that we don't know, and we can know things that we don't believe. For example, the people who were watching the game last night and were pulling for Texas were in a period where they knew something that they didn't believe. You know? A person who gambles is typically a person who knows something they don't believe. They know they're not going to win, but they believe they are. So that's just, I have hardly begun. Okay, my only reason for doing this is I want you to know the difference before those 4 things and the effect they have on making disciples and on spiritual growth.